Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 65th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all, and it is personal news happiness, frankly, for nearly everybody here, because it's been a wild few weeks in the best of ways. Yeah. And let's start off with the big one. The book is out! The West Passage is out!
West Passage, West Passage, West Passage.
Yes. It is out. It has been published. Jared's done his first book event. You can't pre-order it anymore because now you can order it. In fact, you can just go right into your bookstore right now as soon as you're hearing this going like, gee, I haven't gotten this yet.
You can just walk right in and get it. It's bananas.
It's true. It's sitting there. It's sitting there right now. And you're like, but I want to hear it. You can hear the Steve West read audiobook of it. It's there is what we're trying to tell you. So,
and it's great. It's
been a few days now since the firmly officially landed. How's the swirl of everything been, Jared? Or how are you feeling?
I'm so tired. No, it's been good. There actually hasn't been a ton going on with the book itself just because there was the one event, and then there was an editor in town that I know from online, so I was going to an event that she was having, and then another event that she was having, so I'm exhausted now from stuff that has nothing to do with my book. But yeah, it's good having it out there. It was really surreal meeting people after one of the other non-me things, and somebody mentioned oh yeah, Jared just has this book coming out, The West Passage, and two of them were like, you did that? And I went, I've been recognized.
It begins.
Yeah. Yeah.
What should we call your fan base? Jared's people or something. I don't know. We'll figure out something. So,
Checkheads?
Yeah, there we go. Make sure they get spelling right, including circumflex.
Yeah, with the little...
Yeah.
Very, very important. So, but in any event, we hope you are following along on Jared's social media accounts wherever they are, and you'll learn more about and see more stuff and get the reactions and see the tags. And if you're following on Instagram, as we hope you should have been, you would be able to see photos from the marvelous party that was thrown yesterday. The costumes looked fantastic. Yeah. Oriana and I had both had a chance to FaceTime in and be like, woohoo! And anyway, we could go on. It's wonderful. This podcast is not about that, obviously, but I mean,
it's just really nice, and I am trying to savor it as I read it, so I'm not blowing through it as I kind of want to, but I have to say, I feel as though I am in a medieval tapestry when I am reading it, complimentary. So if you are into that kind of thing, highly recommend.
Yes, me being me, I burn through it, but that's because I read fast, so it's just my way. So a second reading, which will, I'm sure, happen at some point, will be even more of a joy to read through and just savor the details, but taking it all in, it was really wonderful, and Ori and I are both very, very touched that we got acknowledged at the event.
Yeah, dude, that is so crazy.
That was really, really something, so we appreciate it greatly. But let's not have all the shine just be on Jared, because, hey, Oriana's project, the film, I mean, it's still a couple days away from the completion of the Kickstarter, but you have met your funding and gotten more besides, yeah?
Yes.
How's that been feeling?
That's very, very nice. I hate asking people for money. Luckily, by the time this episode comes out, you won't be able to give us money.
Unless you want to.
I guess, you could Venmo me if you really wanted to, but...
we'll drop that in the show notes.
Yeah, I hate Venmo. Why did I say that? A complete stranger gave us $2,000. I just blown away by the community of people who love supporting truly independent film, handcrafted film. We just did a camera test today to see to choose our lenses and camera bodies, and I think it's going to be really, really great. It's very, very, very exciting. I also got invited to join the WGA, which is cool. Yay, finally. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's exciting. And Ned.
And then I got COVID. Yeah.
But also you had a really nice piece that came out recently that was very exciting.
Well, I'll mention some of the other stuff. So besides getting COVID, and if you hear the occasional semi-cough like that, that's the reason why. I am on the other side of it. Don't worry. Thankfully, but last 1.5 weeks has been like us, so this is what it's like. So if you're of an age, get your Paxlovid prescription as soon as you can when you get diagnosed, and otherwise just take it easy and all that. And be safe. I'm I'm certainly glad I made it this far into things. I'd rather have been sick now in summer 2024 than summer 2020 for fairly obvious reasons. So it's a little more easier to plan around and diagnose and do everything like that. Still, though, it's been, bleh. Setting that aside, yes, I will just briefly say I had another piece in The Wire where I've been doing a little more writing lately on David Lynch. Specifically, it was for the issue on David Lynch and his sound worlds, and I made a proposal, hey, let's talk about Dune. And I apparently had to overcome some editors there going like, really? But my case was made. Thank you, Emily, for doing that, and it was fun to run that. And the other big thing, though, that is coming up is that my friend Zach Schoenfeld, I hope I pronounced his last name right. This is what happens when you're friends with someone online for years and years. And it's sort of like, oh, wait, what is there? Anyway, he's coming through San Francisco on a book tour of his own for his book on Nicolas Cage, How Coppola Became Cage, about the early years of Cage's acting work in the 80s and early 90s. And I'm going to be in conversation with, as they say, with him at the Booksmith on August 1st. And so by the time this episode airs, in fact, that will have happened, but the hope is that we will have video of that up so you can watch that. And I will add that all this news that we've been talking about is the type of stuff that's been updated on our homepage for the network for Megaphonic FM as part of the refresh that Chris did with the design of the site. He's also now posting news and stuff, so there's a way you can learn about all our doings from that. Another encouragement to please check out the page. Please do subscribe to the Megaphonic Patreon. It's worth your while, trust us. So anyway, that's a lot of setup, and that's been mostly positive, well, aside from the COVID. So let's move.
But you were positive for COVID.
Yeah,
so,
yes. So, but now we have to switch to the literally negative, or at least when it comes time for general Tolkien news, because it's that time, and it's more like, oh boy, here we go. So, Jared, please, as ever, take it away.
Deep sigh. We're recording this the weekend before Comic-Con, so once again, we suspect there's going to be a lot of new things known and seen before this appears in early August, but that's probably all right by us on several fronts. That said, the Lord of the Rings musical is now officially running in Chicago through September 1st, as we mentioned a couple episodes back, and there's a further report that there will also be a staging in New Zealand starting in November, so if nothing else, it really does seem like they figured out a way to make this property work in its newly stripped-down form over the past few years. If we ever get a chance to see it ourselves, we'll let you know more about it. If you end up seeing it, please let us know what you thought. Meantime, most other news has been about the second season of The Rings of Power, and most of it has been about as thrilling as you might guess we would find it, namely, not very. That said, we admit we are impressed that they've decided to go full hot older elf with one role in particular based on the promo photo. Ben Daniels will be playing Círdan, and frankly, we have no problem with this much at least, though of course by default we fear what exactly they're going to have him say and do and everything. There's been a further slew of behind-the-scenes reports as the hype machine is kicking into full gear, and the fact that we've got a photo of Galadriel and Eddar. How did they say in the show? Adar? I don't know. Whatever. It's not like it matters. It's not like it matters. Anyway, we got a photo of them sitting down for what looks like a fancy meal with table settings and everything in some dark wreck of a room or a tent somewhere. Just makes us wonder what the hell we're in for this time.
Yeah. And also, I'm seeing other weird rumors and things about, like, a new love interest for Isildur.
Was there a first one?
I was thinking back
or just like a new character who is going to be a love interest.
There was the Kevin, and that whole thing, and just and now we get that, and allegedly another wizard, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't care, I will see it when it happens. Did the
Tom Bombadil news come out after we had recorded our last episode? Yeah.
No,
anyway,
we mentioned Tom last time, so yeah, so this is the slow drip of, well, I guess the other big thing is hill trolls. Oh, and barrow whites?
Yeah, barrow whites.
Yeah, just... We could go on about why the barrow whites being introduced now doesn't work, but let's just, some things we just don't need to rant about. It's just... Nah. Ben Daniels, though, it's one of those cases that every so often they're sort of like, okay, you've cast somebody who I will actually want to see. I'm sure I've seen it before, but he last clicked in for me at the second season of Foundation, where he played a key character throughout and was one of the best elements of the entire season. So, yay. So it's one of those things that are like, oh, okay, and to my mind, I'm like, if you had cast him to maybe be an older Celebrimbor, I would have bought that.
That would have been like good. I would have been, and again, I wish the actor who plays Celebrimbor nothing but the best. Like, none of this, he did not make any of the choices that
No.
were made for that character. But Ben Daniels is great, and apparently he's a really nice guy. I know someone who worked on a show that he was on, The Exorcist. There was like an Exorcist TV show on Fox. He's apparently like a real nice guy, so good for him.
All right. So, well, good luck to him with whatever happens as we see it. So, yes, by the time
that bag.
By the time the episode comes out, there will be even more stuff. And allegedly, there's supposed to be some presentation at Comic-Con, allegedly, of stuff from the War of the Rohirrim. So who knows? So we may have more things to talk about, or we will, I'm sure, by the time we record our next episode, because that'll be right before Rings of Power happens. Oh boy. Anyway, so setting
Can't
all
wait.
that aside, so the news about the musical is lovely. The just started the Chicago run literally the other day. So so we'll, I'm sure, see if there's more out there. See some reports or video or things floating around. It'll just be interesting to see some more evidence of it. And who knows? We'll take it from there. Otherwise, things are stasis as we move towards things happening later. So that means it's time to shift gears and talk about our main topic this time. It is Oriana's choice of topic. Turning it over to her, you have the floor.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elisar, Telcontar, the Dúnedain, Lord of the Dúnedain, Estel, Strider, King of Gondor, and Arnor. Oh my god, that is so many names. How does one person collect so many names? We'll discuss that. Also, little trivia for anyone who didn't already know this. I'm sure most people listening to this already knew, but originally Strider was Trotter, and boy, thank goodness Tolkien realized Trotter was not it. But what's interesting to me is there's this quote from Letter 163 where Tolkien is like, quote, Tom Bombadil I knew already, but I had never been to Bree. Strider sitting in the corner at the inn was a shock, and I had no more idea who he was than had Frodo. And to me, that is fascinating. We've talked before about Tolkien's way of writing as sort of the story just revealing itself. And so to have such a bedrock of a character reveal himself in such sudden and surprising fashion it really tickles my inner creative. But he is like this sort of bedrock character. He's not our protagonist. That job belongs to Frodo and Sam. Aragorn is a guide. He's like a bridge, even more so than Elrond or Gandalf. He's a bridge between the misty past of legend and the here and now. He's a king waiting for the right moment to take up his crown, or at least attempt to. He isn't even told until he's 20 years old of his true lineage. And one of the things that I've wondered ever since knowing this is he was raised by Elrond in Rivendell. What did Elrond tell him? Who he was, but we don't know what story they concocted, or if was he just incurious? Did his mom just tell him some weird fable? We don't know. But he also ends up with this sort of added carrot of he is not able to marry Arwen, Elrond's daughter, unless he is the king of Gondor and Arnor. But of course, Aragorn is not our protagonist, but the idea of pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into 3 movies and having your protagonist be just like a little guy and his servant, that's not going to fly in Hollywood. So in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and certainly in the marketing of those films, Aragorn takes on a prominence that kind of, and also a characterization that is not fully there in the books. And we will talk more in a bit about the various adaptational choices about Aragorn II. But in the books, as conceived, Aragorn is Sauron's opposite, according to Tolkien in Letter 144. And you can see this. Sauron is a monarch, if also sort of a semi-god-ish, but Sauron seeks dominion rather than stewardship. He desires order, but a specific kind of order, and will bring everything to ruin to see that order established, whereas Aragorn is set up as, a rebuilder, a healer, a man who who wants to govern with a council, even if he does have the sort of the last word. What's interesting is that in addition to Sauron and Aragorn sort of being these two very different forms of monarchy, the tyrant and the benevolent monarch, there is also another foil in Boromir, who is this inherently noble man who has a very different idea of how to approach power, which is to use it at all costs. But when you guys first experienced Strider popping up in whatever context you first experienced that, because we have slightly different contexts for our first introduction to the man, did you suspect, like before it was revealed, that he was a very important guy in the world of the story, before that was revealed? And was it sort of appealing to you that he is not our he's, a little more of a secondary character, if you can remember your sort of first read-through or experience?
Well, I can say that, as I've said before, that for better or for worse, and arguably for worse, my first experience with it, specifically with any element of Lord of the Rings in any true detail, aside from maybe a couple of mentions when the Bakshi adaptation came out and things like, Electric Company magazine or whatever, and things like this, which I wouldn't have picked up much from at all, was the Rankin Bass Return of the King, and where he famously only shows up in any real sense towards the end. He's already identified as Aragorn. He is the king coming back, and so he's sort of like this generic guy, a generic dude with a beard, and they sing a stupid song about him over at the end and all that, and he doesn't really do much. So it's sort of like it in a weird way, you can say that the adaptation sort of arguably puts Aragorn properly in his place. He's a side character, very, very poorly handled, but the focus is again, very poorly and strangely, refer to our episode on that. We'll throw a link in the show notes on Frodo and Sam for the most part. And then I would have seen the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, I believe, at some point. Before that, no, I'm pretty sure I actually read the books first, and then I saw the Bakshi after that. So reading the books, it's one of those things that I do remember, like, friends who had read the books and all telling me, yeah, there's this character called Strider, but he came to this story. I'd heard this secondhand thing about how this was an important guy. So like, man, Aragorn, a thing? Just one of those things sort of like, okay, so I have some sense of this person. But yeah, no, he just, sort of emerges as he does. It's this interesting character in what we now know to be an approximation of a classic old English, pub attached to an inn type thing, only in Tolkien's reworking of it, where things are a little mysterious around the corners and everything's a little unsure and unsettled because you're not in the Shire. And his character fits with that. And it's a little hard for me to go back and fully put myself in that, where again, I've gotten this weird overlay of who Aragorn is or where he's supposed to be when he first emerges. But I will say, just thinking about it, is that he's introduced well from Tolkien's point of view in obviously a revised version of the story as he went, where again, he's taken our narrator by surprise, Tolkien as much as anything else. And so there's just this somebody over there who's just keeping an eye on their doings. It's like, and it's sort of like after all the warnings and after everything they've already been through, it's sort of like, okay, now what's going to happen? And that's what makes his initial interactions, how he speaks so familiarly with Frodo about what's going on, the sense of what's going on there. And without unpacking the entire scene, I think it's a very deft way to do it. It's one of those things where I'm mixing national mythologies here, but we don't have a cowboy on a white horse with a white hat coming in. Specifically, the look foul and feel fair type thing sort of addresses that in its own way. Again, I could go on from there, but I think that is something that, it would have been sort of like, okay, what is this? Who is this? I have a sense of this. Let's see where this goes. And that would have been my take on it.
I mean, the instant he showed up, I was like, oh my God, who is this? He's kind of scary. What's happening here? And I feel like as I've gotten older, I've appreciated a lot more the lack of protagonist status for him. Like even in Return of the King, he never kind of makes it out of the supporting cast. Like a little more than supporting, but still not quite a protagonist. And I don't think I appreciated. Obviously, when I was a kid, I hadn't read enough to be like, oh no, this is actually kind of like cool. Yeah, that the standard hero is not. Yeah, and I had no way of appreciating that. I just thought it was really cool, and I was like, okay, let's go back to the Hobbits now, because they're fun, and he's not fun in the same way.
There's like a reason that we don't actually see him. Like in the movies, we see him go through the paths of the dead, but like in the books, no, it's just kind of recounted to us after the fact. It's not, we don't accompany him on that journey. It's like, oh shit, all this stuff is happening off page. That's very interesting in a book called The Return of the King. that's pretty.
Well, that was the publisher's
That was the
title,
publisher.
right? Like he
Yeah.
wanted to call it something like
yeah, he did not.
The Shadow
He did not agree with
Grows
that.
or whatever.
Yeah, which is. I do wonder if there were people who were very much taken by surprise in an unpleasant way by that, or who disagreed with that. It'd be interesting to find those people and talk to them.
Hold that thought, but I have a little something to offer on that point later. But yeah, I mean, here's something where a bit of a modern comparison can be helpful, for better or for worse. In that, famously, if we're talking good old George R. R. Martin, are POV characters, and the idea of like who actually gets to be a POV character and who doesn't, and why and how, etc. Setting the deals of how he deals with it aside, if we look at it from the idea and apply that rubric to an extent to Lord of the Rings, Aragorn barely has that. At most, we have bits and pieces where it is at one point, at the points where it's strictly just Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. And more often than not, we are outside of his mode of thinking. Yeah. We are the narrator's describing sort of his reactions externally, rather than coming from inside internally. We don't really get much in the way of active thought on the matter. We do bits and pieces here and there, but arguably just as much, if not more, from Legolas and Gimli, especially Gimli.
Gimli, for sure.
If we get anybody who's sort of our narrator on what we get of the Paths of the Dead, and we get mostly through it and then after, and then most everything else is indeed recounted later, it's Gimli's reactions is sort of like, what's going on here, and things like that. Like the closest we get to anything like where it's just down to Aragorn by default, it would probably be the exchanges between him and Éowyn before going in and things like this. And again, we're not in either of their points of view, really, I'd seem to recall. It's more sort of like we're trying to observe outside. We get a sense of Aragorn's feelings, but that's about it. That is about it. The most striking example, I think, of this sort of like external read is where he confronts Sauron through the Palantir and then comes out and he's a wreck. And everyone's like, what happened to you? And then he explains it later, but we weren't there when it happened, so.
Yeah, the closest I think we ever get to being in his point of view is for like the very beginning of The Two Towers, where he's trying to figure out what has happened. And that's it. And that's so bizarre, like for a character this important to not really get that much page time. And the only page time he gets is when he's the only one there. And then meets up with the people later. And everything else is like something that's clearly been told to the narrator by somebody who saw this happen. And this is the one point, I guess, where somebody was like, nobody else knows what happened. We better ask Aragorn.
And like what moments that would have been in other texts would have been big emotional moments are, very strictly emotional moments on that thing vis-a-vis Arwen. Both of those are two of the big ones I can think offhand. There are others are again strictly externally described. There's when they're leaving Rivendell and he's sitting with his head bowed and he says only he knew what this moment meant, and we learn later, much later, if we go through the appendices, what that moment actually meant in terms of here's my chance to fulfill the promise for the woman I love. Here we go, and that's merely skates the surface, of course. And then there's the moment which is I think one of Tolkien's just most lovely moments where they come down from where Frodo comes down from the Flet, the Talon in Lothlorien, not at Caras Galadhon, the Karen Amroth. So it comes down,
Karen Amroth,
and it's coming down, and he sees Aragorn standing there, just taking in all the memories of the parting with Arwen at that time and what it meant and all that. And again, we don't know what's happened. We just know he's like in this reverie, and it ends in that lovely note from the narrator, and never again he came there as mortal man. It's sort of like that it suggests so much and so beautifully and so deftly in such a small period of thing, and we have to unpack it later if we go on and finish the story and delve deeper as we choose to. Otherwise, it's just this moment.
It's just that. Yeah. It is really, really interesting. I also have found myself really appreciating more that moment of Aragorn sitting there just before they're departing Rivendell, because he knows that he very likely, in order to fully, give himself to Frodo's quest to destroy the ring, he very well might be destroying the only chance he has to be with the woman he loves. He might have to sacrifice being the king in order to complete this. And that's a heavy, he spent at that point 50 years, 60 years or so, knowing this is what I have to do. And it might all be for naught. Yeah, we should probably talk more, too, about the Aragorn, Arwen appendices love story, which, is so fascinating to me, could absolutely be its own. We don't need more Lord of the Rings things, but...
But if we did...
But I don't necessarily hate the idea of a movie of their story. I hate myself. This is awful. But it's so sad is the thing. I feel like a lot of the people who kind of ding Tolkien for being, I don't know, surface level, black and white, that kind of thing, haven't kind of really soaked in some of the stuff in the appendices, like the absolute tragedy of Arwen, and we're kind of straying into her, but she did not fully realize what she was doing when she opted to die and watch the man that she loves die. It's so bitter that is catnip to me as a writer. I love that. I think that's so interesting to explore. And, the relationship with Elrond, Aragorn just Kool-Aid Man's in as this 20-year-old little pipsqueak. And he's like, I love your daughter. I'm not going to say anything, but of course they know. Of course they know. And that, I just love that. I don't know. Did you guys, you both proceeded directly to the appendices the first time you read?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you kind of race through that? Did you skim it? Did you fully absorb, embrace? Do you remember when you did, or if you cared that much?
I mean, speaking as someone who was 12 when I read it,
right,
and, life
right.
experience was, not really there yet, Was I kind of ripping through it? Probably. But was I interested to learn more? Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
So, and it was one of those things, is sort of like the sense of the backstory. I mean, his mother is easily one of the most fascinating women that Tolkien has ever written, because that whole idea of, especially, I gave hope, but I didn't. It's one of those things where, that's somebody who, and you get no sense that, she would have ever known or guessed what would ever have happened, that sort of sense, just sort of like you're the matriarch of a fringe people or surviving on the edge of everything. Things are looking increasingly just sort of like, I don't know. And, you've done this and, when Aragorn is born, in the chronology, Bilbo's quest hasn't even happened yet, his adventure rather. So it's just sort of like, and then, the father dies young, truly shadowy character. It's sort of like, you only get a sense that the continuing tragedies may just simply play out. And for all that he, is slowly revealed to be somebody who is capable and charismatic, as is gently established in Aragorn versus Arwen versus. And, wow, that's a reworking. There's a reinvention for you.
The divorce case. Oh my God!
Do a George IV, Queen Charlotte thing here. Have a Bridgerton version of Middle Earth. Anyway, setting that aside, the thing that sort of strikes me about it as well is that, borrowing your term, Oriana, Aragorn, fucks up, as it were, up the ladder. But of course, and this is something that, of course, Tolkien always made. It's interesting, given that what we all know now, which was not known then, about these type of backgrounds. The most we would have gotten when you're reading it at the time, you didn't know anything back in the mid-50s, whatever. It's like, okay, there's a story about this Baron and Luthien of the thing, and that would have been like, oh, a suggestive actor echo. But, now we know that he had spent decades playing around with this idea of mortal man and what this meant and how these connections, and how most of them ended up really badly.
Yeah.
The closest thing there was to a successful one, maybe Tor and Idril, and we don't know exactly what happened to them, and they went through a hell of a lot of crud. And Baron and Luthien, passed, but that scene is an ultimate thing, and Turin. We know Turin, and, etc. So this is the idea of okay, it finally happens correctly. It's almost sort of like, what if I gave someone a happy ending?
This is the best case scenario, and it's still it ends up kind of a nightmare for most of the people involved.
Yeah.
I always thought it was so interesting how the Baron and Luthien story, you don't, if you only read Lord of the Rings, you don't know exactly what's going on. But the way that the people involved in this, in Lord of the Rings, see the echoes of this happening again, and the way that adds a ton of dimension, even if you don't you don't know the specifics, but you're like, these people are, this story means a lot to them, and it's clearly messing with them emotionally a little bit, that history is repeating itself. It doesn't ever go, it doesn't push it too far. I don't know how I don't know how far you could push this kind of thing, but just this kind of little undercurrent of, especially in Elrond's case, being like, oh no, like, I know how the last one turned out. Like, and then Aragorn, I guess that you can kind of read it in some ways, I think, is Aragorn having a temptation to see himself as one of the heroes, like by aiming this high. It's
that's what I was going to bring up something about this idea of self-image of Aragorn, circling back fully to him, is that I think the moment where he is most, I don't want to say consciously heroic. Let's not go quite there. I think heroism is demonstrated in many ways. I think actually, he said, I think one of the more, is one of the more key moments where he shows, we could say, a true heroism, you could argue, is when he is healing in Minas Tirith after the battle. And that is something very quiet and very focused, and is more just sort of like, bringing hope and bringing light and bringing care and all that, instead of just simply going around and swinging this up. In interesting contrast, because it takes people aback, and not entirely positively, I would argue, is the scene where they first meet, where he and Legolas and Gimli first meet Éomer. And he basically stands on ceremony at a certain point. He's sort of like, look, here's who I am. And he gives this whole big, incredibly almost formal speech. And you get a sense, because we're observing again from outside, Legolas and Gimli are sort of like, the hell?
Who is this guy?
He doesn't, Tolkien doesn't express it that way, but you can tell it's sort of like things like, where did this come from? What is this? And a subtext of, and why are you doing this? And the idea is that Éomer is sort of overawed by it. He's sort of like, oh, whoa, geez, and all that. And he sort of responds a little more formally, going like, okay, and all that. And, they build up things, and there's a much closer relationship and bonding moment right there. But you get a sense of Aragorn sort of like, I am who the hell I am, and you're going to listen to me.
Yeah. And he also, it's him speaking Éomer's language as
I was going to say.
That's, he knows from his prior experience that this is how these people, this is how they're going to respond more positively.
Yeah, they'll respond to honesty. Like, if they had sat there and tried to lie about who they were, that would not get them any friends in Rohan. But he knows, no, I've just got to be as direct as possible, because these people won't stand for anything.
And it pays off in moments like where, they do literally draw their swords together at Helm's Deep, and they have this, Anduril for them, things like that. So Guthwine for the Guthwine, it's pronounced. Yeah. So. And
it is actually going the Éowyn of it all, too. The Aragorn Arwen story was a much later edition, which is probably why it is mostly relegated to the appendices. It's like, I built this Jenga tower, and I can't remove this piece without having the whole thing kind of fall apart. So I'll just put it in the appendices and it'll be fine. But, originally Éowyn's feelings are somewhat returned by Aragorn. That was discarded. It makes sense, pretty well done, but you can see where he almost like you can see where he erased.
Yeah, sort of a palimpsest kind of thing happening.
Yeah. The layers are literally there. So
the fact that women keep falling for him is extremely funny.
I will hold a different thought on that for later too. So in terms of reactions to him, but this is more on the adaptation front. I mentioned I was going to bring him something about reactions to him at the time, and I don't necessarily recommend this book, but Paul Coker's book Master of Middle Earth was one of the very few, and I think maybe the biggest book on Tolkien reaction criticism published during his lifetime. It came out in 1972. Now, Paul Coker, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, was he wasn't quite on the level of W.H. Auden in terms of, oh, hey, we should pay attention to this. I'm a real fan of this, because Auden was very well known as a poet, of course, and things like this, and that had a very strong cachet. But Coker was very well known as an English literature scholar. I believe he graduated or taught at Stanford for many years. You could say he was coming from a small C conservative point of view in general, both religiously and otherwise, is my understanding. He very much was involved on a irregular basis with folks like the Mythopoeic Society and sort of that angle of fandom, which, while, obviously a lot of formal Tolkien fandom did tend towards that by its very nature, sort of Inkling's descendant, if you will. And elements of that are in here. I bring up this book, which I got when I first got into Tolkien. I'm like, what's out there? And I found this book used somewhere for like a couple of bucks, and it's sort of like, okay, it's something. And it's interesting for what it is, precisely because it's an analysis of the work that was available at that time, which again was 72. So you think, not even the Silmarillion was out and Tolkien was still alive. Yeah. So it was an attempt to look at things. And what I think is interesting here is that it brings up something that, of course, as you pointed out, Oriana, has been wrestled with ever since by certain elements of, you could say, the fan base or the people at large. If he's not the hero, who is? Coker tries to argue for him being the hero very, very specifically. And he does so and mentions in reaction to other critics who were clearly thinking, no, it's Frodo. So it's an interesting little slice of like a perception from a point of view on this. I'll read a bit of this right here. This is the beginning of his chapter. He has a chapter on Aragorn, specifically. This is the opening paragraph as mentioned. In his essay on fairy stories, Tolkien takes pains to make the point that most good fairy stories are not, quote, stories about fairies, end quote, but about, quote, the adventures of men in the perilous realm, unquote. Aragorn is unquestionably the leading man in The Lord of the Rings, which is a fairy tale with which is a fairy tale within Tolkien's broad definition of the genre, yet he is probably the least written about, least valued, and most misunderstood of all its major characters. By some critics, like Roger Sale, he is completely neglected in favor of Frodo as central hero. By others, like William Reddy, he is dismissed as, quote, almost too good to be human. He has some of the qualities of a noble horse, end quote. Mr. Reddy wants him to display, quote, a sharp taste for sin, end quote. So you get a sense of sort of like what some of the reaction and debate to what Aragorn was meant to be, how to be sort of read there at that time. And again, Coker is clearly coming from a more a small c conservative point of view. He also sort of plays his hand, I noticed a little bit later. I'm going to agree to one other bit, and I'll leave it at that. Our understanding of this complex man will be better served by showing how his varied qualities complement or contend with one another, and how he struggles to keep uppermost those that are best. This is the same struggle that has to be waged under different guises by all the leaders and many of the followers of the West. Without it, they would not be good. One of Tolkien's major achievements in these degenerate days is to win our sympathy for their triumph over the evil from within. Silicon Valley would love this guy.
Yep.
No wonder he taught at Stanford.
Oh my God, that makes so much sense. Actually, I feel like I could see the tendrils reaching out across time.
Interesting how it plays out, isn't it? So,
oh
but it's interesting too that we get this debate early on. So again, I'm reading from one side of it. I actually wouldn't mind going back to. I love that William Reddy comment about a noble horse. It's sort of
that's my new favorite thing.
Any other way now?
Celeborn is a purse, and Aragorn is a noble horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get it.
It's interesting that frame that they react so poorly to the framing of something that, again, I would argue to a lot of us would seem to be like the logical point. It's like, Frodo is the center person. Aragorn is a protagonist, but he's not the central focus. He's not the thing there. And I would argue, maybe, that this is that in as much as Tolkien was surprised by Trotter and then becoming Strider, emerging this sort of thing, is that by creating a story that was focused on the hobbits and then delving deep into what that actually meant and what their characters are in this big overarching romance that he creates, is that having done, again, speaking of the backstories, the stories of Beren, of things like this, all the rest of it, he's already done these kind of heroes. Now he does one sort of like, they're not at the center.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting. That is, I would argue, a very distinct difference between the younger Tolkien and the older one, willing to do something like this, and willing to do something that's deeper and more resonant as a result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's just the impulse of everybody to see Aragorn as the hero because he's the most protagonist-shaped is like... It's really frustrating, honestly, to be like, you have Frodo, who is very quiet, and so people assume he's a blank slate, as the center, and it makes it so much more interesting. And then you've got this other guy who's like, he's a noble horse, he's really cool, but like he doesn't have to be that. You don't have to force him into the center when that's a position he himself doesn't want.
And like, he makes some bad choices. He since the Argonath, all my choices have gone amiss. I use that line not on a daily basis, but I'll forget something at the grocery store and tell Steve, and he'll be like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so speaking of, like, people read a lot, project a lot onto characters on the page. It's a little harder to do that in an adaptation. So we have a bunch of adaptations to sort of talk about. Of course, like, there's like the main one that I think we'll probably spend most of the rest of the time talking about. We had John Hurt as Aragorn in the Bakshi version, which is, feel like I should have listened to the episode we did about it, because did I talk about how it was like a little weird?
But it was Jared's favored one, I remember, compared to
Yeah.
Viggo's. I remember you explained that you felt it worked better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Visually, no.
I mean,
Yes.
visually,
visually
The
weird.
characterization.
pencils Aragorn.
Yeah.
The characterization is what I responded to.
Right.
Thick thighs, Aragorn.
Well, yeah, but
His
yeah, no,
haunches.
I think Hurt does a very good job. And again, there are certain moments. Again, thinking back to your comment, like Jared, like after Boromir dies, his sense of like confusion. I remember you saying, Jared, that really sort of sounded like, "What do I do?" That sort of. I thought there was a good resonance there. An example I'll bring up for an adaptation we haven't talked about, but one of these days we will, I'm sure, is the 1981 BBC version.
I knew you were gonna bring it up. I knew it. You can always. That's a square on the bingo card. Is Ned brings up the 1981 BBC radio
I
version.
bring it up for a reason. It's a very notable one. And the actor who portrayed him was a very well-known, established actor, noted for his Shakespearean work, sort of seen as post-Olivier, Robert Stevens. He was never famous over here. He did appear in a number of certain productions and things that got on both TV and film over time. He may well be most known in that regard for one of his later roles. He was one of the Falstaff's sort of like complement in Branagh's Henry V. From late 80s, 89, 90. He was one of the chief roles in that. That's kind of where I first noticed him. And he was also in other things like the Burton Taylor Cleopatra. He has a small role in that, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, a very distinct, resonant voice. And I think he does a very interesting job with what, after all, is something you have to convey only through the voice when you're doing radio. Doing somebody who's sort of like a little war-weary. He's seen it all. And he's sort of dealing with it as best he can, exhibits his sense of impatience at certain points with situations, which is something that's there. And it would have been interesting for him to do one of the more notable textual revisions that Tolkien did, that from the first to the second edition, where he cuts out that weird little joke that's a joke against Gimli around the time when they go back to Helm's Deep after visiting Isengard. Look it up. There's something there where Aragorn has a little bit sort of like biting humor at Gimli's expense at something. He decided in the later edition of the revision in the mid-60s to get rid of that. It's sort of like, I don't know, man. You could have kept that in.
Hey, it's never too late to change things.
True enough. So that would be sort of like, again, without delving too deep into it and all that. Yes, of course I would bring it up, but that is an interesting other adaptation and approach to the character that I always sort of bear in mind as well.
One question that I had and Jared, your memory, I think, is better than mine, because I just wasn't as aware of the casting process and like a lot of the news that was coming out while the Peter Jackson movies were about to go into production. And in production, originally Peter Jackson wanted Stuart Townsend as Aragorn, and then they had to recast. Do you guys remember at the time this being like a huge deal? Were people happy, unhappy? Were you happy, unhappy? I do not remember. I have no memory of this place.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, I was pretty young, so I don't remember a ton of that stuff, and I would have had no idea who Stuart Townsend was anyway.
Right?
But I also think he wasn't like a really big star or anything.
No.
And I do think all I've heard since is just like it wasn't working out. They got like 2 days of filming done, and we're like, no, this isn't happening.
Yeah,
which I think is the correct decision, because he's not like a super interesting presence. Like, sorry to Stuart Townsend, but like. And even though, like, I disagree with the Jackson Mortensen take on Aragorn, but Viggo Mortensen is definitely a presence.
Yes.
Like, you can't overlook him.
I feel like as a like mostly straight lady, like he came along at like the perfect time for me, really imprinted on, some of my choices in men are like a little more understandable.
We all have our role models.
Yeah, I feel like it was just... I like Viggo's take on the character, even if a bunch of the script choices for the character I'm much, much, much iffier about. And, people can go back and listen to us talking about the movies in general. But yeah, I just found Mortensen's, he hit me at the right time. He broke his toe.
And
we're all that people at the party who just bring up that
he broke his toe
every time.
Yeah. No, he's so strange in the role. To me, I just find him really. He's coming out of some totally left field place. He's this like weird wet man,
dirty.
Like he always looks a little bit wet,
yes.
And I have no idea why that is.
Was that like an early 2000s thing? I feel like there was a lot of wetness, a lot of wet men in the early.
Yeah, maybe.
Wow.
Like Gladiator, everyone's always kind of wet.
Yeah, no, he's so intense in a way that I find very hard to describe, but I think in some ways it's closest to like a David Lynch villain.
Oh.
The way he just
All right.
stares. Like he's so weird, and at the time I didn't realize why I found him so strange, and I still don't quite, but over the years I've like watching it over and over and over, I've gone like, this is a really weird Aragorn. He doesn't do anything particularly strange, he just behaves oddly. To me.
This is why it would be so, I can't believe I'm doing it again. She's back on her bullshit. Like, so sorry, everyone. But I am kind of this kind of segues into the last thing I kind of care about talking about, which is, we do have theoretically a Gollum-centric movie coming up that theoretically will also involve Aragorn. And it will be, like, I hope that they do maybe try something a little different. I would be interested to see. I don't know. The script for that isn't even written yet, and I don't know. There's all sorts of factors that come into play. But I would be kind of interested to see if they could do maybe a little bit of a different take. With a maybe a new interesting actor, like just see something different. That might be cool.
Yeah, I think one of the right choices that they made with Viggo Mortensen for me is that he is kind of unconventional looking, and I'm desperately afraid that we'll just get some like Instagram influencer looking ass in this Gollum movie.
Timothy
and I don't
Chalamet is.
Oh God, no! Get behind me, Satan!
And like, I like Timothy Chalamet as an actor. Don't get me wrong.
I like him perfectly fine, but he's got Paul Atreides. Let him do that.
He can't be in everything.
Yeah, he does. You don't have to just put him in everything. Glenn Powell is
I was about to
Aragorn.
say, I was literally about to mention his name. That's the other these are the two choices.
Which is the worst choice for Aragorn?
Look, I would genuinely be interested to see what Glenn Powell does with Aragorn. Just totally like, what is that? What does happen there? Let's find out.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's screw with everybody. Let's get someone whose background is African or East Asian to play the role and just say like, damn.
I would love that. I would love.
Yeah.
There are a number of very attractive men from actually like the entire Asian continent, but like Japan or China.
Yeah, okay,
like
Dev Patel as young Aragorn.
Dev
I'd be down.
I actually, I'm intrigued. And again, it is that like lizard brain, like he's just attractive. Yeah, he's just attractive.
He's done the Green Knight. He's done Monkey Man.
We could just watch the Green Knight. Like,
yeah, the idea of Dev Patel. Probably wandering really far afield here, but the idea of Dev Patel as Aragorn is very interesting to me because his screen presence has that like uncertainty and kind of like reluctance, almost like a kind of softness. Like he seems always slightly unsure of himself, in a good way. Like it really works in like the Green Knight, where he's just flailing, trying to be a person. And seeing that.
Oh my God! Is that why I love that
Aragorn.
movie so much? Who needs
Yeah,
who
just
needs
seeing that-
therapy when you have By-The-Bywater?
We're here for you people. So,
Yeah.
well, keeping an eye on the time, Oriana, do you want to
Yes.
wrap up with some last thoughts? You mentioned you had a couple.
You know what? My last thought now is Dev Patel as Aragorn. That's it. That's the whole episode right there.
All right. Well, if we want to add some quick fantasy casting as Aragorn, I will say that yesterday, for the first time, I saw the French New Wave, latent wave classic, I suppose, Les Samurai by Jean-Pierre Melville and Alain Delon. At that age, pretty good, I would say. He'd have an interesting sort of riff on Aragorn, maybe. So he's here got a striking look. Maybe he would have been a very badass elf. I don't know. So, Jared, do you want to fantasy cast anything for Aragorn, old or new?
I don't know anybody current, really.
We'll just go for Dev Patel again. We'll all go
so
with
out of
Dev,
it.
yeah.
We're putting you
Dev
down
Patel.
as a Glenn Powell. Congratulations.
Poor man. Don't make him suffer that much. Okay, all right. Then we'll call that the end.
I mean, well, okay. I will say, thank God we're past the. I say this, but maybe we're not.
Oh.
We're probably past the time when we would have cast Charlie Hunnam in the role.
Oh boy. Channing Tatum is. Again, I'm kind of curious.
Oh, the future. Okay, time to look ahead to the next episode. It is choice of topic for Jared. What are we talking about next time?
I've been going back and forth a lot on what to talk about here, and kind of, in a way, reluctant, or even one might say unwilling to settle on a topic. So, we're going to talk about the Avari.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yes, because I've always been fascinated by them, and these are, for those who don't know, the elves who refused the call to go to Valinor and lingered in the east, like Legolas's people and some people of Lothlorien. I find that they're an odd little, like, you don't spend a ton of time with them in any iteration, and what's that about? And what are they doing there? And were they ultimately correct not to go? So
yeah, so dig out Nature of Middle Earth again. I seem to remember there's some stuff in there, so that'll be good. Yeah. So once you get past all the math. So much math.
This many Avari have this many babies over this many years. And
we will not explore that again. So okay, all right. Well, we will do that next time, and we will come back to you next time. So once again, thank you very much for listening. As was said at the start, if you would care to go to the Patreon for megaphonic.fm and consider subscribing, we'd appreciate it, because that is a way to help support the entire network and keep things going, and it would be great. And you can join our Discord as we talk about things. As always, By-The-Bywater can be found on Blue Sky, and we're there too, individually, as well as other spots on social media. You know where to find us, you know where to get more information. It is great. And of course, you can always drop an email at bythebywater@gmail.com. And having not said this for a while, hey, please put in some reviews of the podcast if you could at various spots, whether Apple or elsewhere. We always really appreciate it. So we will talk to you in a month's time. Until then, we thank you very much. Until then, we'll see you.